My name is Sean Baldwin. I'm the CEO of Secure Cyber, and welcome to our first live stream. That was really obvious. We've got Micah Waldman behind the scenes. That's my son, so he's running the board and is our producer for today. And really what we wanted to do today is just kind of go over some of your burning cybersecurity questions that we've been seeing on our YouTube comments. If you've never been to the stream before, we do a segment called the Weekly Cyber Update. We do that every week, where we take kind of the news headlines, just kind of go over, kind of what the latest is. And then we also have a podcast called CS Cyber. Mike, if maybe you can put some of those in the links or some of the comments for these other resources, we can get that for people. So how this is going to go today, we are live. So if you have questions, first of all, share the stream. If you've got people, they don't have to be in industry. If you've got folks that are maybe people you know or relatives, and they're interested in just asking some questions about cybersecurity or their privacy, whatever, it's just kind of an open forum. So first and foremost, share the stream and post your comments in the comment section. So we have a list of some of the comments that we're going to go over, and then what I plan to do is also touch on a little bit about the city of Columbus and now Sumter County Sheriff in Florida, and talk a little bit about Recida, the hacker group that's extremely active against local government, and just talk a little bit more in detail about what is happening, what's going on behind the scenes, that type of thing, to just promote some just general awareness to the public, so that they can be educated as well. So we'll go ahead and go into the comments a little bit. So we've got, I don't know, 5 or 6 comments, maybe more. I bet you I could hear Micah if I turn these up. Yeah, now I can hear you. That was my fault. So I can hear my producer in the ear now, so that helps out a lot. Okay. So we do have some stuff in the description for you to look at as well. So what we're going to do is just dive right into the comments. So Micah, do the pronunciation again for Garowan. So we think that's the pronunciation. Loyal watcher, very devoted viewer, and comments a lot. So we really appreciate that. The question he has is, like many anti-cheat solutions in video games, I think people need to take a step back and think long and hard about whether third-party software should be allowed to operate in the kernel in the first place. Now, just to give you some context, I think what he's talking about is a lot of the CrowdStrike fallout. We can talk a little bit about that as well. I found it surprising that a lot of people were surprised that CrowdStrike was operating in the kernel. If you're not familiar, we're not talking about popcorn. The kernel is the core operating system. It's the core of an operating system, and they call that the kernel. There's a lot of direct access in the kernel because it's the core, and that's where a lot of EDRs live. EDR is endpoint detection and response. Just for an education perspective, this is not antivirus. This is not McAfee or Norton antivirus or Symantec. It's not Avast and I don't know, a plethora of other antivirus solutions out there. This is EDR, endpoint detection and response. It's I often, when I'm talking about this, I classify it as weaponized antivirus. So EDR is what CrowdStrike is. We here at Secure Cyber, we use a solution called FortiEDR. It also operates in the kernel. So let's go ahead, now that I've kind of explained the panic of people thinking, whoa, something's in the kernel. That's crazy. For EDRs, if you're going to operate as a good EDR, you're going to be there. All right. Another thing to do might be for Microsoft to say something like, if a driver fails on boot, store information on that in a counter somewhere in the registry or something. And if that counter goes above a certain value for the same driver, disable that driver entirely on next boot up. Now, one of the things we learned about FortiEDR is that it has a fail-safe built into it, that if it blue screens, there is a counter. So if it blue screens more than 3 times, that counter will activate and actually unload the driver and make the device visible and bootable. So I'm sure we'll see something like that with CrowdStrike at some point in the future. But that's what this is talking about here. This would have stopped the biggest pain point of remote or virtual systems being stuck in an infinite boot loop. You're absolutely correct. Until a person manually intervened. They might have rebooted 4 or 5 times and then disabled the problem driver, which would have allowed the next reboot to succeed, at which point CrowdStrike would have been able to pull the fixed update. So you're absolutely right. I think that's a lesson learned from CrowdStrike. I'm sure that there'll be some discussions about that internally. The final report, after action report, came in for CrowdStrike. I have not reviewed that in great detail yet. I hope to get to that a little bit over the weekend so that we can have a show next week where we are talking a little bit more about it. So again, if you're just joining us, share this stream with people around you. We're answering questions live. If you've got questions about a number of the breaches that have happened, what's going on at Columbus or Sumter County down in Florida, which is brand new. If you've got questions about double extortion and kind of what's going on in the background on some of these incidents, a lot of the silence is legal driven, and it's unfortunate that it's like that. But there's a lot that we can talk about without jeopardizing the investigation. So share this stream. You don't have to be in industry in order to ask a question. If there's something that you have to ask, please put it in the comments. I am a seasoned cybersecurity executive. I have also been in law enforcement for a number of years. I was a police officer. So I have a lot of background here and can shed a lot of light. So I'm going to continue to read some of these questions as we wait for questions to appear. But please, please ask them. So another question. He goes, man, these videos are top notch, which I really appreciate. You all would not believe what goes on. Now I know how the news industry works a little bit, and I'm only like an eighth into it. It's a lot of work to put a show together. So a lot of these people on YouTube that are influencers and do this on a regular basis, man, my hat's off to you because I just do this a little bit. Once or twice a week. I think we're in the studio maybe 3 times a week, 2 to 3 times a week. But there's a lot that goes into it. So I appreciate the comment. You should advertise your channel more because you deserve way more views than you're getting. Again, Garowin, hopefully we're pronouncing it right one. I appreciate you very much. Thank you for that. That really means a lot to me. So we are trying to advertise more. I know Micah, our producer, has been experimenting with YouTube ads. That seems to be working. We've got a lot of people that have subscribed to the channel. By the way, if you're on here and you haven't subscribed, please do. We're going to try and go live as often as we can. We're trying to treat breaking news and go live and be there so that you can ask the questions and we can get the answers for you. But I appreciate all the comments. We are trying to push the channel even more. But what does it is you all, right? So you all clicking the like button, sharing the videos, commenting on them, sharing them inside Facebook, LinkedIn, all the social media channels, letting people know, hey, this dude, talks about cyber. And if you've got questions about cyber, even if you're a citizen and you have no connection, you don't work in the industry, but you're curious about what's going on, or maybe you've got a letter saying, hey, you've got credit protection coming, and that scares you and you don't know what that means. This is the venue for you. All right, so one of the other comments that we're going to talk about, I'll read it to you. The EDR files, which we just talked about, EDR, endpoint detection and response. Again, that's the kind of anti-ransomware or weaponized antivirus. The EDR files that allow arbitrary code execution in the kernel mode are not even signed and verified. That's scary. If the driver verified a signature before loading each such file, a definition file was broken, signature would simply fail that check, and the system can boot without loading it. There is not even a checksum, and the code is to load it into memory, and just put the instruction pointer to it. Wow, this is going pretty technical. Sure, I will allow this company to take care of all my security needs. So I think what you're saying, and thank you for the comment, I think what you're talking about is that we're trusting a lot of third parties pretty heavily. I think that's the name of the game, right? So as we look more at software as a service, SaaS solutions, we look at things like Microsoft, Snowflake, CrowdStrike. There's a whole session that we can do on nothing but Snowflake and what happened with that compromise. Snowflake is a data lake aggregator or a platform for companies to load large amounts of data up into their platform so that it can be analyzed in a certain way. So there's a lot of risk in trusting those third parties. There certainly is. CrowdStrike was able to push updates immediately and gain immediate access to the operating system. So there was a lot of risk there. But really, if you want to talk about it, what's the difference between what happened with CrowdStrike? I know the difference, so don't annihilate me too much. What's the difference between Microsoft putting out an update and blue screening everybody's domain controllers? Because that's happened, right? We've got other providers that have done updates and have broken stuff. I don't care who you are, Microsoft, Palo Alto, CrowdStrike, Fortinet. It doesn't matter like who you are. You've not been insulated from this. So there's a lot of trust there, but I think there's a lot of trust and verify that can occur. So I think it's a fine line between allowing and knowing what access that those components have, and also making sure that there's checks in place to make sure that you're doing your due diligence to make sure that there's a test environment. I know not everybody can have that, and that you're doing what you can to test it. So the CrowdStrike thing was a real test to just allowing a piece of software immediate access with no questions asked, and that burnt us. So I totally agree with you, but I think what it comes down to is some third party. Accountability. I see that. We need to trust someone. It is far better than trying to do it ourselves. Daniel, you're absolutely right. This is a situation where, a lot of us outsource to other providers, like whether it's an IT provider, a security provider. Obviously we don't, make our own EDR. We don't make our own hardware, firewalls. There's a lot of vendor dependency out there, a lot. And I know sometimes it's frustrating, right? We deal a lot with a certain brand of firewall, and there's a lot of undocumented bugs that occur. And that's frustrating, right? That can lead to all kinds of different issues. You've got this issue, you can't figure it out, the config looks fine, but there seems to be this underlying issue, right? And those are different situations to go to. So, Daniel, I'd say, I think it's a lot of just doing a lot of due diligence with vendors, looking to make sure that you're not working with some fly-by-night company. We here at Secure Cyber, there's a lot of stuff that we do with Israeli technology, and I'll tell you that a lot of times there's potential risk in working with smaller companies, but then there's a lot of downsides of working with much larger companies too. So I agree with you. You have to trust somebody, but really I think it comes down to just doing due diligence and making sure that you've covered yourself, that you've done everything you can to verify that. Because, at the end of the day, you look at Gmail has been having, I guess, some type of global outage over the last day. And I haven't really looked at that a whole lot. I see it in the news. And, that's another one of those dependencies where, we're depending on Google to deliver our mail. If you're an Office 365 customer, there's been a lot of outages with O365 lately. And that's frustrating, right? We expect these vendors to, especially something like Office 365 or Google, we expect them to be up 24/7. 5 nines always available, and the reality is that's not what happens. There was an Azure outage, Azure Cloud, Microsoft Cloud, where they became victim of a distributed denial of service hit. And so Azure went down, and then there was the CrowdStrike incident. I think happened literally the day after. So really bad timing for any of that to happen. But it's just I hate to say that it's par for the course, but in some ways I think it is. All right, so we'll go to another question. Thanks, Daniel, for interacting. Anybody else who wants to interact? We've got some new people that have joined. Welcome. We're answering your cybersecurity questions live right now. I don't care what question you have, and I don't care who you are. If it's education, if you're just trying to go into the industry and you need help, you're a citizen, you've been notified, you're in one of these breach areas and you need help, share the stream so we can answer your questions. All right, it's 2024. People are still using TeamViewer, a user says, ? Are they running Windows XP also? You'd be surprised. Of the cases that we come across where things like Windows XP, still exist. It sure does. We've run into a number of situations where we've run into things like Windows XP. I have in the past run into Windows 98 machines. It's not out of this world to see a Windows 95 box, which I've seen before. I think you'd be really surprised. Local government, manufacturing, heck, even the airline industry. I think, we saw the Southwest Airlines at one point came under a lot of attack because I forget what the situation was, but we had found, or somebody had found out that they were using like some pretty out of date stuff. And I saw the whole thing with Delta and CrowdStrike going back and forth. That somebody was saying that Delta was using probably some mainframe type IBM type stuff for crew scheduling, which mainframes and IBM are not out of date things, but they need to be kept current. But anyways, everybody's giving Southwest a hard time, and then when CrowdStrike hit, we had the issue and it took down the airlines. The only two airlines that I think were flying in the air at the time were Southwest, who was making a joke about, who needs us now? And Alaska Airlines, I think, were the only two airlines that were actually flying. So TeamViewer is very widely used. TeamViewer and AnyDesk are probably two of the most common things that we find when we're doing risk assessments. Unfortunately, in a lot of the water and wastewater treatment centers, we see a lot of AnyDesk and TeamViewer. I don't want it to be like that, but certainly when we get into those situations, we definitely counsel people to make sure that those aren't available anymore. I see another question came in. We still have one server 2003 and a connected XP workstation because the old software will only run on it and we cannot get the data out. Do you work in local government? Because it looks like it. That's also very common, especially in local government. Unfortunately, I did a lot of work in public safety, and that's also very common in public safety. So when these systems get so far behind, it's almost impossible to migrate off of old technology, like to upgrade. I kind of figured you were. It's extremely common. So having a connected XP workstation that may be running one specific application, maybe it's just running one piece of software that keeps a component of like maybe your records management system or your CAD system alive. In law enforcement, RMS is records management system and CAD is computer-aided dispatch versus computer-aided design. So I ran into that a lot. When I worked for a local law enforcement agency, there was a lot of older technology. Heck, even Daniel, they were afraid to patch things. I was afraid to patch things back then because I didn't know what would happen if that machine would reboot, right? Some of these environments I had walked into, that Server 2003 box may not have been rebooted since 2003. And everybody was terrified to reboot it. So I'll tell you, though, like some of the things that you can do that I wish I would have known then that I know now is this is where segmentation comes in. And I've talked about segmentation before on this show, and I've had people go, what in the world is segmentation? This is one of those situations where if I was in your shoes, what I would do is I would use some VLANing technology in order to move those devices kind of into a container that allows more separation between them and the bad guy. Obviously, now in this particular case, Windows XP is actually supported on our FORTA EDR platform. That is actually not very common because a lot of the like CrowdStrikes and some of the other more prevalent EDRs actually don't allow that downgrading. They don't go that far. They're pretty much only focusing on supporting current operating systems. But if I were you, that's one of those things where I would definitely use some segmenting technology to just keep those devices farther away so that if a bad guy was to get in there, now honestly, they may not mess with an XP or a 2003 machine, to be just brutally honest with you. Even though there's probably a ton of exploits out there for them, I would venture to say you're not working with Microsoft in any way to keep those current. I don't even think they would. But that's what I would do. You're not alone. You and, out of 15,000 law enforcement agencies, 14,000 of them are probably have one piece of computer technology that's old, and they're holding on to because they have to. So I appreciate the comment. Again, any other comments, just put them in there. I'm going to keep reading questions. And as soon as I run out of questions, we're going to talk about Columbus and we're going to talk about Sumter County. So hang in there. All right. I'm not Ryan Hall. There's no active weather or tornadoes. So sorry, I can't make this any more exciting than what I'm doing. I wish I could. Actually, Daniel, here's one of your questions. Any thoughts about separating the PLC network from the operations network via a firewall in front of the HMI servers? Well, there's some acronyms in there we got to go over. All right. Any thoughts on separating the PLC? Is that I always get it wrong, the primary logic controller? The PLC is a card or a controller that is typically is being run in an industrial control network, like a water, wastewater system or a power plant. So the PLC network from the operations network via a firewall in front of the HMI servers rather than just a dual connected HMI server. Human management interface, that's the graphical interface to a control system network. Programmable logic controller. I knew I'd get it wrong. The HMI pretty much is the golden goose of a water and wastewater plant. All of the compromises that you all have seen or not seen in the news involving water and wastewater typically have involved the remote control operation of an HMI. I wish I had a picture that Micah could throw up of an HMI. Maybe he does. I don't know if he can do that or not. Just to show what it looks like. I know we've used them before. All right, he's going to try to throw one up there just so that everybody can see what an HMI looks like. So what we've typically done is we've recommended of course, if you're looking at a city, right, and you're looking at a city that also does water, wastewater, and power, typically, in just typical operation, there's a city firewall. And what we'd like to see is right after that, we'd like to see the water and waste. Let's say it's a wastewater plant. We'd like to see the wastewater plant to also have a firewall. And then what we'd like to see next is we'd like to see the HMI right before you hop into the actual control network, the PLC network. We want to see a firewall right before that. So it's a design thing with HMIs. We don't like to see dual homed HMIs. So dual home means that we don't want to see an HMI server that has 2 network cards in it, preferably, because specifically speaking about dual homing, in the law enforcement side with CJIS, which is the Criminal Justice Information Service, that's not allowed. In Ohio, that's governed by LEADS, which is the Law Enforcement Automated Data System. You've got a state regulatory thing, and you've got now the feds with the FBI oversees CJIS. Oh, okay, awesome. So Micah's thrown up a picture of what a HMI looks like. So this is the interface of an HMI. It's very graphical. It would possibly show a water tower, a pump station. And the idea here is that an operator is sitting in front of this HMI, and they're able to give remote controls to a valve, turn a valve on and off, empty a water tower, and those types of things. So that's what you're seeing here is what an HMI would look like to a water, wastewater, electrical. This could be a nuclear power plant. Anything, it could be cereal, it could be General Mills and you're making cereal. HMIs, this would be controlling the systems that are making the cereal and doing the bagging and, all those types of things. So HMIs are not just restricted to the water, wastewater industry or power. We would see HMIs in just about every industry. Critical manufacturing, maybe you're an automotive manufacturer and you're making parts, all those types of things. Anywho, hopefully that answers your question a little bit without going into, a complete, description. You can take that down, Micah. Without going into a complete description of, how to architect a industrial control system. So that's kind of that. So I want to go into the last question, and then because Daniel seems to be the only one that has any questions on this earth. If anybody else has questions, please share the stream. We're going to stay on for a little bit. It's 2:30 Eastern, so our plan was to go an hour. Believe me, I'll probably talk another 30 minutes. So Tom Rolfson asks, the U.S. has been caught with its pants down. We've let thousands of terrorists in, and very few understand all the vulnerabilities in our infrastructure. Well, that's all true. We all think water, sewer, power grid, internet, phone, fiber, trunks. But what about fuel? 90% of all American homes don't have 4 days worth of food. How many have more than 2 to 3 days of gasoline? If refineries, depots, truck stops, gas stations, and tankers were attacked, our fuel supply would stop in hours. And I'll talk about that in just a minute. Nobody is going to drive a 50,000 gasoline bomb down the freeway where they can be attacked from another vehicle or even shooter on a frontage road. All gas would be sold and stopped in hours. All right. Tom, you're right. So there's nothing in there that's not accurate. If you guys think about do you guys all remember Colonial Pipeline? So Colonial Pipeline, I can talk really, but it's Friday. The Colonial Pipeline was one of the most impactful incidents in critical infrastructure in our history. So if you're not familiar, the Russians got into Colonial Pipeline and were actually able to shut down the transportation of oil. That affected the southeast U.S. very, very heavily. We were not able to get trucks. They weren't able to fuel them. Everything that required any type of infrastructure to fuel those trucks and to move that fuel around stopped. And the rest of this, of what Tom is talking about, is definitely preparedness conversations. First thing I'll do, we're in hurricane season now, right? So there's a lot of prepping that needs to be done if you live in a hurricane zone. If you live in a hurricane zone and you're on this channel, definitely comment, some of the things that you've done or some of the things that you've looked at to prepare. Ready.gov, I know, is kind of the go-to website for the federal government that kind of gives you guidelines on, properly preparing for an incident and those types of things. I think what Tom is talking about, which is actually a good discussion, is that there's a lot of discussion on preparing for a disaster I don't want to use the word prepping because I think that takes on a negative tone for a lot of people, like, oh, he's a prepper. No, I mean, I think there's some realistic things that he's talking about where we need to be just generally prepared. You know, how many U.S. citizens right now have 4 days worth of food and water? Probably almost none, right? So we have to do some basic preparing to make sure that if something would happen, whether it's the result of a cyber attack or not, that you'd be able to prepare yourself. Because, you know, honestly, most of what he's talking about, you know, it's like I said, it's hurricane season. So we just had Hurricane Debbie go through, and it impacted Florida, and you know, there's probably some power outages and those types of things. I'm sure there are. There were some floods and water rescues, and you know, people's homes destroyed, and you know, we pray for all those people down there in those impacted areas. But just some basic preparing, whether it's a hurricane, a tornado, an earthquake, which are all the perils, right? So anything involving, you know, just a natural weather phenomenon. But I really think, you know, some threats to our critical infrastructure are real. And I'm not a doomsday guy. I'm not trying to freak everybody out. The news media has been very touchy about these topics because of what it can generate. But I think instead of saying you're a doomsdayer or you're passing along a bunch of information that'll scare people, which I've been told that before. I really think there's a fine line between, I think you need to be aware. So let's just call it education, that there are other countries that are tampering with our critical infrastructure. They have gotten access to our water, wastewater, and power plants. The federal government was compromised. CISA was compromised. And a threat actor got access to a lot of potentially very damaging information about hazardous chemical storage inside the U.S. and how we store it and where it's at. Those are all very real things that are just, you know, kind of glossed over a little bit. So I'm not saying, you know, wake up scared tomorrow. I just really think that if most of America would just be aware of what's going on around them, consume the information, consume it safely, consider the source of where it's coming from, trust and verify. So, you know, don't take anything that anybody tells you at face value, verify it yourself. And do some of these basic things. I think what Tom is talking about can be accomplished. So, you know, maybe check out the ready.gov site and, you know, hit Sam's Club up today and maybe, you know, start stockpiling some water and those types of things. You know, just do some basic research. I don't think it's a situation where you have to start digging holes in the ground. You know, I've seen some of those shelters. If you live in the tornado belt, that's a whole different discussion. But I'd say some basic preparedness is definitely on order. All right, so we don't have any other questions, but what I wanted to do was I wanted to talk a little bit about the city of Columbus, and I wanted to talk about just the Sumter County, Florida breach. So let's talk about Columbus for a little bit. I am not speculating anything. What I'm going to talk about is an experience that I have as a business owner. We do this for a living. We respond to cyber incidents. We respond to companies at their worst hour. I've done almost a dozen of these in the last 2 years. I have very firsthand response on what it takes to respond to a cyber emergency for an organization, how to respond and how to recover from it. So I am speaking from firsthand experience of how this is done. I'm not here to armchair quarterback the city of Columbus or Sumter County or any other organization. I'm here to just explain to you how this goes down and what happens. So let's talk about a breach or a cyber incident. So we're always going to call it a cyber incident. We're never going to use the breach word because, there's a topic came in here. So let me answer that real quick. Drew says, what do you think the long-term effects of the CrowdStrike breach will be? For example, maybe we will see far less incidents from security vendors due to increased attention being put on the business continuity. That's a really good question, Drew. I would expect to see, first of all, CrowdStrike is going to have to deal with right now a number of lawsuits. That may or may not impact them. I think right now they're running with their tail between their legs at this time. They obviously, got something exposed that went wrong, horribly wrong, and looking at their stock price, of course, that has been impacted very heavily, which you would expect it would be. I've had a lot of people ask me, do you think CrowdStrike will bounce back? I think it's possible. I think it's likely. I don't know how long it'll take. But as far as like the long-term effects of CrowdStrike, number one, I think a lot of security vendors are going to learn from their mistake. That's first and foremost. I think a lot of security vendors are going to look at what happened there and say, wow, we don't want that to happen to us. So there's going to be a lot of discussion. I think there's going to be some architectural changes for sure to make sure that something of that nature doesn't happen or that it's controlled. So that's the first thing. Obviously, CrowdStrike doesn't need to worry about brand recognition. So maybe their marketing budget can go down a little bit. I think they have some PR issues, of course. So I think maybe some of that brand recognition money is going to go to recovering their name. I don't see a bunch of companies running away from CrowdStrike except Delta. Maybe Delta Airlines might move on to something else. So I definitely think you'll see a situation where some other vendors like SentinelOne and 40 EDR and some of the other EDR vendors may pick up some additional customers because of this. But if I had to guess, I would guess to say that CrowdStrike will probably be all right. I think it's going to take them a little bit to recover from this. But I think they're big. I tell you, I think it'll all depend on the lawsuits. So I've seen a lot going on about that, about CrowdStrike's MSA and how it's written, and how they can't get sued because of how it's written. I don't believe that. If I had to guess, I'd say that Delta and some of these other larger customers negotiated their own contract that was probably different than the standard wording. So maybe controlled deployment so customers can test deploy, do a test group. Yes, that's how we do it, Daniel, 100%. So we don't. We create a test environment for the customers or a test group. We actually test it internally first. We actually get those updates internally at Secure Cyber, and then we work with our customers to work out a update pattern, and we kind of do a controlled, almost like a ring type system for sure. So that's how we do it. All right. So let's talk about the city of Columbus and Sumter County and some of these other breaches. Let's talk about how a breach happened or how a security incident is responded to in the first place. So when we get that call and it's a company that's in trouble and they say, hey, we've been hit with ransomware, all of our computers are down, we don't know what to do. First thing is, we'll be there within 30 minutes, 45 minutes, if it's around this area, right? I truly believe that people want to see people in a time of desperation like that. So I think it's very, very important to get there on site, look them in the eyes, and look at what's going on. The second thing is, we'll sit down with whoever is called us, and we'll just kind of learn from them what bring us up to speed so far. What did you see? What happened? What all have you done at this point? There's a lot of preservation of evidence that needs to happen. So I can't talk about that enough. That there's an evidentiary piece of this that's very, very heavy. And when you're talking about something like the city of Columbus, that's likely the state that they're in at this point. And they can stay in that situation, that forensic gathering status for a long time. So we'll talk about that in a minute. From a local government perspective, once we have, or any company, once we have that information, if it's a local government, there's a number of things that need to happen in order there's a continuity of government thing that occurs. So if you're a city, you're going to call city council and you're going to have an emergency session. There are rules to that. So those have to be documented and you have to take the roll and you've got to have, there's a whole structure to that, right? So local governments cannot just meet as a group without a public notice of some sort or documentation of that happening. So Once all that happens, generally you declare an emergency and you start the process of figuring out what's going on. There's also an insurance component to this. So there's a call to insurance, and you let them know what has happened. You file a claim, and you start that process. Soon after all that, and I'm talking probably within 24 hours, probably the next day, the insurance company hopefully is going to return your call and pretty quickly and get you set with an initial call. And you'll have the opportunity to go through with the insurance company what's going on. The insurance company will assign you a law firm, and so you'll likely get outside counsel, and that law firm will be guiding you through maybe public relations. So they'll be giving you some PR advice. They'll be there to help with things like press releases and those types of things, and word them correctly. And then there's a forensic aspect to it as well. So these insurance company will get a third-party forensic company, because what has to happen is we have to perform digital forensics in order to find out who, what, when, where, why, and how. And everybody's going to want to know that. Who was it? What did they take? What was the data? So was it like personally identifiable information? Was it, what did this contain? So in order to answer all that, you have to do this whole digital forensics process. And depending how big you are, it can take a long time. And if you're specifically looking at something like the city of Columbus, I don't know the size of Sumter County Sheriff's Office. I just saw that and kind of saw, man, if you guys saw their evidence that they posted on the dark web, some of the news outlets had posted, it was awful. Like there was a passport and a fingerprint card. There was like driver's license information. It was awful. There's that whole forensic process that's going to happen. And where I was going with this is the larger you are, the longer this takes. It wouldn't be out of the ordinary for the forensic process to take months. And you may be like, that's crazy. Like, why does it take that long? Well, if you've got 5,000 or more devices, right? Any number of thousands of devices, it could take a while. A lot of these situations occur and you have to shut networks down. So understand that all those regular tools that IT people can use to remotely access devices and perform all these cool remote tools, all that stuff's gone. Like, you have a compromised network. The network is completely compromised, and everything that you do is going to be manual. So imagine physically visiting each individual device. I know when the CrowdStrike thing was going out, the stats that came out was that 8.5 million Windows devices were impacted. Well, imagine millions of those devices that had to be visited by people in person. And everything that we were reading was that was a reality. I think a lot of those people a lot of those IT folks worked a lot of hours in order to physically go to these machines. There was the whole BitLocker key issue, where if you didn't have access to your keys, or your keys were on your domain controller and your domain controller was locked up too, you couldn't access anything. So a lot of times in a lot of these cases, we've had to visit these machines individually. So let's say it's hundreds of machines. You have to visit hundreds of machines. You have to pull forensic images of the hard drives. And I'm telling you guys, this stuff just takes a lot of time. Laptops, desktops, servers, VMware, anything virtual. It literally is an absolute nightmare, and it takes a long time to get all that information. So I guess, I know some of these cities are counseled to not say anything, and I get that part. But I think a lot of time, I think you can spend a fair amount of time without jeopardizing the investigation by just educating the community on what the general steps are in a situation like this, without giving out exact steps, right? Without going into specifics. So, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Public, in general, you can look at this forensic process to potentially last 2 or 3 months. Here are the city services that are not available right now. We're going to update a website on the city's website or on social media every day. and we'll give an update on any services that come back online. We'll open up a forum to answer any questions about how to pay your bills, how to pay your water bill. There's just so many details from a city service scenario that's a lot of the angst. A lot of the angst is, I need city services. Are police and fire impacted? Is it going to take longer? Can I still get police reports? I was in an accident the other day and I need a copy of my report. Can I get it? You don't want the public just showing up to a lot of these city government offices to just a sign that says, sorry, we're closed indefinitely. Thanks. I really think that there's a lot of PR that has to be done while all this complicated work is happening. So all the forensic stuff is happening. Credit monitoring is going on. City services are up in the air. There's just a lot. There's a lot to communicate while it's going on. So my hat's off to all the legal officers out there, federal law enforcement, FBI, Secret Service, Homeland Security, CISA, everybody that's involved in these situations. I've been with these folks. I totally get it. I understand. But I also see the public's angst of, can we just get some information of what's happening? Can you just walk us through what is going on behind the scenes while it's quiet? So that's a lot of it. So let's talk about the extortion stuff. And let's talk about how ransomware works. And I'm going to speak at a very 100,000 foot, but I want to explain kind of how this goes down. Generally, what happens is a threat actor gets access to a network. So a bad guy gets access to a city, a county, a private organization. And generally, they get access, and then they sit in these environments for a while to make sure that they can go undetected. And then these bad guys move around. And the only analogy, the best analogy I can give is kind of picture a bad guy sneaks in your house and then just sits on your couch. And he sits there for about 2 or 3 days. And you're in and out of the house and doing stuff, and you never notice that there's a stranger sitting on your couch, right? That's essentially what happens. So a lot of times these bad guys go completely undetected for a long time. They could sit for weeks or months and gain intelligence and information about who you are, who you do business with, who you're communicating with, how many employees you have. We've been on many compromises, especially for local governments. And the two things that they go after first, the first thing they go after is the insurance policy, and the second thing they look at is your budget. And if you're wondering why, well, that's where they get the number of how much they're going to charge you to get access to the data. But let me back up and talk about how this works real quick. Typically, the bad guy will get in, they find the information, and then they start exfiltrating it. They start bringing it out, right? And sometimes this is done in little increments. So this is very dependent on the customer's internet connection. So if they have a slow internet connection, they're going to have to offload the data in very small increments over a long period of time. A lot of bad guys will do that anyway, just to stay underneath the radar and not trigger any alerts of data moving out of your environment. So the other thing that happens is an exploit kit is deployed, and they deploy the ransomware to all the devices. This can either happen at the very beginning or it can happen at the very end. We've seen both. So how the idea works is they've taken all your information, and then as they're walking out the door, they hit the encrypt button. And then that's where all of the devices that have the ransomware loaded onto it encrypt. And it locks you out. You get a ransomware note on the machine, and that device is taken out of service. So in a double extortion scenario, what I mean by that, this is how this works. Double extortion means that the bad guy wants you to pay to get your data back, and they want you to pay so that they don't leak the data. Now, in most organizations, if they have really good backups, they're not going to pay the ransom. They're just not going to pay it. And if it's the city of Columbus and their backups are perfectly fine and they're just in a recovery state, after they gather evidence, they're just going to move on. And because there's no honor among thieves, are you going to trust a hacker to say, If you pay me $1.9 million, I promise not to post it. That's what happens. So that's why you don't pay the ransom. That's why we look at double extortion as kind of a weird thing, because almost nobody, I've really only seen a few situations, honestly, where somebody has paid the ransom to stop having their information leaked to the dark web. Because I'll tell you, these guys are going to do it no matter what. I really think that. Yeah. So usually most organizations, whether it's local government or private sector, will pay the money if their backups are bad. If the backups are not good, they do not have good backups, and the bad guys were able to encrypt enough machines, they'll pay the ransom in order to get their data back. I'll end with this. We're kind of at the last piece of the live stream here. I've got like maybe 8 minutes, 7 minutes. I'll end with just saying, it's really rough out there right now, and if you're going to do anything, just have a plan. Sit down and talk about it with your staff. Talk about an incident, how you would respond to it, who you would call. Verify that you have offline backups for sure. I mean, like real offline backups, and that they've been kept updated. Make sure that you have a true EDR. Make sure it's configured correctly. So we run into a lot of companies that appears they have all the right security equipment, but it is misconfigured. They've tried to save money. They wanted to, just do it themselves, YouTube it, and really, a lot of this stuff just takes professionals to configure and maintain. So that's some of the biggest advice I can give you. Patch often. Of course, going back to the CrowdStrike situation and some of the stuff we've been talking about, previously, make sure that you have a test plan. Test those patches before you put them out. Make sure you have really good segmentation. So make sure your network is segmented. Make sure that you have a next generation firewall. And you're like, Sean, this is a commercial. Are you just trying? No, I'm not trying to sell you anything. I'm telling you that the world has evolved and that there are certain newer things that you have to have in order to combat this stuff. So you need to have a next generation firewall. You need to have your east, west, north, south. Everything needs to go through the firewall and it needs to be inspected. Have really good logging. That is really, really important. I'll tell you guys, we have gotten into more situations where we've gotten called and we've come out to do an incident response, and we start to ask about logs and what they have from a logging perspective, and they have nothing, zero. I'll tell you, that's a really rough spot. I've had to have discussions at 3 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday with an executive and tell them that there's no forensics that we can do because they have no logs. They never kept anything. So I'm sorry, you'll never find out exactly who did this or what they went after because there's inadequate logging. So if there's anything you look at, like when you're done with this, and Micah, maybe you can post the link in the comments, look at the CIS controls by the Center for Internet Security. The CIS top 18 controls. If I were you and I was just starting out, I would be armed with two things. One, the CIS top 18 controls. It tells you in order of the most important to the least important what you should do. Okay, so that's that. The second thing I would have on my desk is the Verizon Data Breach Investigation Report, the DBIR. The Verizon DBIR will give you the ammunition that you need to ask for the money that you need in order to combat this stuff. One other comment by Daniel, the bad guys also wipe local logs on the servers. That's correct. So that's why, and I'm glad you said that when I was talking about logging, that's why you have to have a good log server that is completely separate from your infrastructure, either with a provider in the cloud, so that when he's right, they will wipe the security logs and local logs on the machine. You need to make sure that you have a copy of that somewhere else so that we can use that forensically. So again, CIS top 18 controls and the Verizon DBIR are the two things. Yep. Yeah. No, the Center for Internet Security, Micah. My producer was talking to me in my ears. The Center for Internet Security has the top 18 controls. If you just Google CIS controls, it should take you right to the website, and you can access that. So, all right. Well, we're at the top. We got 3 minutes left, so I don't see any more comments in here. I just want to thank everybody for attending. This was our first live stream. Very honestly, we wanted to just test the technical equipment to make sure that we could get this up and running, so we can. So our goal is to go live and provide you all some late breaking news or access to resources. So if we get another large event like a CrowdStrike or something like that, we can go live and start answering questions and helping people as we get this up and running. But really my desire at some point is to kind of run a 24/7 cyber news channel so that maybe you could have us on while you're in your office, and we can get you guys we can get your questions answered and get you some of the resources. If you are in the Dayton, Ohio area in this region, check out gocybercollective.org. I run a nonprofit that is all about community and cybersecurity. So we meet here once a month here at the Tyler Technologies building in Moraine. This month, we've got a great speaker on August 21st talking about how to be a rock star, be a rock star IR. So Matt Shear will be joining us. We meet at 8 a.m. on the third Wednesday of every month. Free breakfast, great community. We have almost 100 people that come once a month. And really the whole idea, guys, is to just make you not feel alone in cybersecurity. So if you get in trouble and you need something and you need a community to support you and surround you, that's what the nonprofit's about. So go check it out, gocybercollective.org. We'd love to see you August 21st here in Dayton. Thanks much for your time. Have a great week, and